It was 2 in the morning when the sound of heavy boots shattered the silence of a quiet suburban street. A soft lamp glowed in the living room of a modest home where a young black woman lived alone. Without warning, the front door splintered open. 2 uniformed police officers stormed in, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, their voices sharp and commanding. For a few long heartbeats, the woman stood frozen in shock, her heart pounding in her chest. Then one officer's beam landed on something hanging on the wall, 3 bold yellow letters that would change everything. FBI. Maya Reynolds had moved to the quiet neighborhood less than a year ago. A disciplined professional in her early 30s, she worked long hours in Washington, D.C. as an investigator for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Her home was her sanctuary, a simple 2-story house with warm, earth-toned walls and a single hallway leading to the living room. On that wall, almost as a personal reminder of her duty, she had hung the black FBI field jacket she had been issued years before, something she rarely wore but never tucked away. The neighborhood had always seemed calm to her, though she'd noticed the subtle glances, the way some neighbors stiffened as she passed, or the fact that patrol cars sometimes slowed down in front of her driveway. She chalked it up to curiosity, maybe suspicion, but refused to let it define her life. That night had been uneventful. Maya had finished reviewing a set of case notes and was preparing for bed, her phone charging on the nightstand. A light breeze moved through the curtains, and the house was otherwise still. Unbeknownst to her, however, a false report had been called in, an alleged break-in at her own address. Whether it was a mistake or a malicious act, she never knew. All she knew was that within minutes, the quiet of her home would be ripped apart by the weight of prejudice and the sound of boots on her doorstep. The first sign that something was wrong came as a low thud, like someone testing the front door. Maya's pulse quickened as she stepped lightly into the hallway, peering toward the faint glow of the streetlight outside. A second thud, louder, followed by the unmistakable crack of splintering wood, sent a jolt of fear through her. She realized with a chill that someone was breaking in. In that instant, her training as a federal agent kicked in. She didn't reach for a weapon. She hadn't expected trouble in her own home, but instinctively shifted her position to keep a line of sight to the door while maintaining cover behind the hallway wall. Her breath slowed despite her racing heart. Years of field work had taught her to measure danger in the pauses between sounds. The front door gave way under a forceful shove, and 2 uniformed police officers stepped in, flashlights slicing the darkness. The taller one swept the beam across the room, while the other rested a hand on his holstered sidearm. Neither announced themselves, and the aggression in their movements was unmistakable. It was as if they had entered hostile territory rather than a private home. For Maya, the moment felt surreal. The house she had bought for its quiet safety now seemed like a stage set for someone else's assumptions. She stayed still, waiting to assess their intentions, a part of her bristling at the sheer recklessness of the intrusion. Another part noted with grim clarity that she fit a profile that too often found itself on the receiving end of this kind of force. The officers moved deeper into the living room, their boots scraping the floor. One of them muttered something under his breath. Maya couldn't make out the words, but recognized the tone. Suspicion laced with contempt. The tension was thick enough to feel in her chest. A silent standoff between the invaders and the unseen resident. As the flashlights danced across the walls, they passed over framed certificates, bookshelves lined with professional texts, and finally came to rest on the far end of the hallway. There, illuminated in stark relief against the warm paint, hung the black jacket with 3 bold yellow letters, FBI. For a fraction of a second, the room went still. The beam lingered as though the officer's mind was catching up to his eyes. The taller officer's shoulders stiffened. The flashlight quivered slightly in his grasp. His partner's eyes followed the beam and widened, his hand slipping instinctively from his holster. The air between them shifted, an unspoken recognition of a line they had just crossed. For Maya, that moment crystallized years of understanding. Prejudice often struck first and thought later. She stepped forward just enough for the light to fall on her face, her posture calm but unmistakably in control. The silence that followed was more deafening than the crash of the door. It was the silence of realization, the sudden awareness that the assumptions that had fueled their aggression had no place here. The officers exchanged a glance. Their prior bravado evaporated as they took in not just the jacket, but the composure of the woman standing before them. The authority they had wielded so freely only seconds ago now seemed misplaced, exposed under the weight of a simple, irrefutable fact. The person they had treated as a suspect was, in fact, one of the nation's own federal agents. In that instant, the power dynamic reversed. The same men who had stormed in as if confronting a threat now stood awkward and subdued, their flashlights no longer probing the shadows, but dropping toward the floor. The silence stretched until it became clear that there was nothing left for them to say. The officers eventually muttered a few perfunctory words, a hollow attempt at explanation before backing out of the house as quietly as they had forced their way in. The front door hung crooked on its hinges, a testament to the night's intrusion. Maya stood in the hallway for a long moment after they left, her eyes fixed on the jacket that had stopped them cold. It wasn't the first time her identity had served as a shield, but it never ceased to remind her how thin that shield could be. She thought about the neighbors who might have heard the commotion but stayed silent, and about whoever had made the call that set this chain of events in motion. She thought, too, about how differently the night might have ended if not for that jacket. The image lingered, a stark reminder that authority and respect for some are too often determined by perception rather than truth. In the days that followed, Maya reported the incident through official channels. An internal review was promised, though she suspected it would end like many such reviews did, quietly, without real change. But she also chose to speak about the experience, sharing it at a community forum where neighbors and local officials gathered. She described not the personal insult, but the deeper danger, the way assumptions and biases could turn an ordinary night into a life-threatening ordeal. Her story resonated, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was painfully common. It underscored a reality that countless others faced without the protection of a badge or a title. As she ended her remarks, Maya posed a question that lingered in the minds of everyone present. How many lives are put at risk because of assumptions made in the dark, assumptions that might be silenced only by a symbol of authority? It was a question that demanded reflection far beyond that single night, a call to examine not just policies but the prejudices that still lingered, unspoken in the quiet hours before dawn. The room fell into a heavy silence, as if the weight of her words had settled over everyone equally. Parents thought of their children walking home after dark. Neighbors considered the quiet biases that shaped their split-second judgments. Even the officers in attendance shifted uneasily, confronted not by accusation, but by undeniable truth. Maya's story became more than a single incident. It became a mirror reflecting a society still learning to see beyond its own assumptions. The question she left behind would echo long after the meeting ended, a reminder that real change begins with uncomfortable reflection.